Good morning. I just wanted to discuss some things that aren't perfect but are necessary. The Articles of Confederation were written and adopted in 1977. This was before we became the United States of America, before we were considered Americans. It was ratified in 1981. It by far was not perfect, but it was necessary because we were, colonies at the time, just kind of split apart over a large area, right? So we needed to start some type of structure to bring us together, to get to where we are today with our government structure. And we're just going to talk about the things because the Articles of Confederation were not perfect. The only thing they did during the revolutionary times was they kind of brought some unification during our revolution, things of that nature. So, but they did not have the legislative, judicial, and executive branches. They could not figure out how to centralize, if we're all working together, how to centralize being able to pull things together because we left that much sovereignty, that much independence to, those specific states at that time or those specific colonies at that time. As we became a more state union, we had to figure things out, but it was not perfect, but it was necessary. There are conversations about legislation that is not perfect, but is necessary. From the Articles of Confederation not being perfect, but implemented and adopted, they were able to, those individuals, that group of people were able to come together and say, hey, which part of this doesn't work? They the conversation was, hey, the articles, what you get today because of social media, because of the way the media is able to touch so many people so fast, you get things like affirmative action is bad, DEI is terrible. You get those type of conversations. Which piece is bad is what legislative authority gives you. Which part isn't working so we can vote that specific piece out. But it's not perfect, but it is necessary. Can someone, if you're going to write out a program, what are you going to replace it with that's necessary? We understand the structure of some of our legislation is not perfect, but it is necessary. When you have a blanket conversation and you just throw out a term, immigration, we need immigration reform. All you hear is immigration. You never hear the part that isn't perfect, which part isn't working. So we can just say, hey, this part of the immigration bill is not working, but the immigration bill overall is necessary. When I talk about governing to completion, when I put out videos on the governing the who, what, when, where, why, and how, it's because we understand that things that we put in, that our policies are not going to be perfect, but they are necessary. When I talk about giving you legislative authority to decide as a collective, i.e., again, in 2020, there were about 7,300,000 registered voters in the state of Florida. If I'm saying that 70% of those voters need to agree with a bill that is going to affect the majority of Floridians, and we don't get a 70% vote, it doesn't mean that it isn't necessary. It doesn't mean that it's not necessary. And it doesn't mean that it's perfect. But it does mean that we didn't convince 70% of our constituents why it's necessary to do that. So they didn't vote on it. Now we're going to have to come back in here. We're going to have to come back like we always have since the beginning of our first governing documents. The beginning of our first government documents. We're going to have to go back and say, hey, which part of this wasn't perfect? From that evolved into what we know today to be the Constitution. The first 10 of those, for educational purposes, the first 10 of the Constitution are considered the Bill of Rights. It's not the fact that I want you to go back and read every single one of them, because we have a complete breakout. They call it constitutional law. We have a whole breakout of constitutional law where somebody has educated themselves and put themselves in a room and said, hey, we're going to decide what this means. So if you have a problem with it, you're going to have to change our perspective on what we've decided this means. There are a lot of things that people have a problem with, but I'm going to go back to things like affirmative action, things like DEI, which stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. They're not perfect, but you better start asking, were they necessary? Were they ever necessary? And which parts don't work? Don't just let people throw out terms to you. You find out which parts don't work. Hey, if you go to an event, hey, you just said that we need to get rid of this. Which part do we not do? It's not working. Did you come here? I'm not asking you to read the whole 900-page bill in front of me right now. I just want to know if you showed up with the part that's not working. Not just your perspective, but which part can we go and actually say, okay, line number 56, section A, subcategory 1 Charlie says this. This is what makes this not work. So is the rest of the bill something that is working? Yeah. So do we have to vote out the entire thing, or can we just vote to cut this specific piece out that doesn't work? That's how granular we want to make legislative authority. We're not trying to break the entire system. That's called a revolution. We're not trying to break the entire system. We're trying to put the reform back in it. We're trying to put the regulation back in it. We have to go through the line items and decide what's going to work. On our ballot, I wrote it down yesterday, on our ballot, we are going to see weed legalization, and we're also going to see abortion's rights come up on the ballot. The bills for those, they're probably not going to be perfect, but maybe somebody's saying they're necessary. And we're going to see those pop up on these ballots coming up. And you're going to have to be educated on which parts are workable or not. But they're not going to put the whole bill on the ballot. You just get to say, yes, I'm for this, or no, I'm against this. That's it. That's it. They may, which, like, hey, do you like this? So it's very important to read the entire thing. It may be super long, but it's just important, because the problem is we're gonna vote no if your bill is full of bad things. We're not going to vote your bill in if it's already full of bad things. That's why it's so important to have legislative authority, because too many bad things are getting voted through. But if I can tell you, if I can sit down and say, hey, this line item, and this line item don't need to be here, and I have 70% of Floridians that also agree, you got to take it out or get rid of the whole bill. We don't have to, we can get to the best bill possible for the majority of people and not let so many things slip through the cracks. We have got to make people understand that if you're saying we don't need the entire thing, has it evolved to something that this was implemented for to help all these people? Have we changed or put something else in its place? Because it's not perfect, but it was necessary. The Articles of Confederation, they were definitely not perfect, but they were necessary. That's how you're able to say things like, but that's not against our constitutional rights, because we learned from our mistakes and we evolved and reformed those mistakes into something a little more perfect. They actually use the term a more perfect union. That's how we get there. I'm going to help govern the not perfect, but is necessary. You guys have a great day.